Hello, everyone. We're going to give about a minute or two to let everyone trickle in. Thank you for joining us today. Going to give it a couple more seconds and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining, everybody. All right, we're going to get started today in a webinar titled Timeout with Sam. Sam Ekstrand is no stranger to our organization and to our members, so we're really excited to have her back. She serves as legal counsel to our board of directors. She has been instrumental in the revamp of our bylaws and really just taking care of our organization with the care that it deserves and the intelligence that we're lucky to have from Sam. So I'm happy to have Sam here. In terms of logistics for today's webinar, you can put your questions in the Q&A at any time. They will all be anonymous and they'll be asked at the end of Sam's presentation, which is going to be about 25-30 minutes long. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I welcome Sam back to the NFHCA to help us digest what's going on in the landscape right now. So Sam, welcome back.
Thank you so very much. I'm on the move because I'm not at my house. And my sisters, they're cleaning the gutters and the dogs are barking just as my webinar is about to start. So I'm going to head downstairs where it's quieter. But happy spring, everybody. It's really exciting to be here, although I know there are a lot of areas that got a lot of snow this weekend, but it is spring. And I imagine that some of you are getting to work with your teams, maybe on spring break, or maybe you just are getting a break. But thought it'd be helpful just to check in at this time and, give you a few things to think about that I hope are timely to you, kind of where you are in the season. It is primarily geared to college coaches, but there's some good content in here if you are a club or a high school coach or a college coach who's not coaching, off season right now. But we will go ahead and get started. Just to give you an overview, I have 5 quick hit points that we're going to talk about today. And this is what they are. We're going to talk about the salary survey that the NFHCA just completed and released, and Kate Clark, who compiled, some really impressive reports that I really want to point out to you and talk about. Connections on campus, team, setting expectations, and the last one in the center is March Madness, which is a timely topic and theme for many of us across the country who are have brackets, on both the men's and women's side with the NCAA tournament that's playing out on the basketball front. So let's get started with the salary survey. I have to point this out as a resource for you all as NFHCA members. If you recall, there were salary surveys that were distributed. We had, really pretty good participation across the board. And Kate, combed through, perhaps with some help from the staff. Becca, I'm not sure, but I know Becca's been involved in the past in putting them out. This is a great tool. And if you're not aware of it, you need to be. If you took it and then just forgot about it, now's the time that you get to reap the benefit of it. Why is it so important? Because it captures current data in our field hockey market. It's and reliable in the sense that, people are putting it in. It's timely. There are some other compilations of salary data out there. WinAD is the common one that the athletic directors have. I have found that to be outdated, with numbers that are not quite as accurate. But this is self-reported. And again, the synthesis of information in these reports is really illuminating and helpful when you're looking to negotiate, your contract or even just accept terms of employment. So even if you don't have a written contract, it is still really can be a helpful source as to where the salaries are in the different divisions, broken down by experience and all sorts of different factors. I think what's important to remember, and I've talked about this before at the convention, is this is defining our market as the field hockey market. And that's, in many respects, an appropriate definition. However, it's limiting. And why is it limiting? Because field hockey is a women's sport. And historically, and I even would say currently, coaches of women's sports are paid less than coaches of men's sports. And so we always keep that in mind when we're negotiating the terms of our employment, and in particular our base salary. But still, it is important to have an understanding as to where the field hockey market is, even if we are going to try to expand that definition of market to include, say, your athletic department, which is something we talked about at the convention. When we talk about the challenges of field hockey, maybe not having a male counterpart that's easy to point to, kind of like soccer or basketball or lacrosse. However, it is still you're still a coach in a department, with a certain number of games and a certain number of people on your roster that is often relatable or equivalent to coaches down your hall. So I point this out because it just came out, in this first quarter. Kate did a marvelous job, and I really encourage you to take a look at it, as you are either renewing, looking at new jobs, really want to, or just check out kind of where you stand in your division. And certainly if you have any questions about the report or how you can use it, I would always love to talk to, any coach about it. But that's the first point I want to definitely put on your radar in this timeout talk. The next point, which I'm raising now because I feel like, I know everybody's still busy and always busy, but when you're not in season, so to speak, is generally when you have more time to do things like point number 2, which is to build connections across the campus. And, I want to put this on your radar because I think it is very easy for coaches to stay in their bubble, stay in your office, stay in your hall, go out to your field, practice, work with your kids, and kind of, stay in the confines of athletics. I really want to encourage you, to branch out and to build connections across the campus with all this list of, different categories of people, and the different ways that you can do this. And, it can be formal, it can be informal. You could go ask to just meet in their office, meet for coffee, have lunch, go to a talk that they're at, and then introduce yourself after the talk. Individual settings, group settings, all different sorts of ways to meet the different leaders on your campus. And why this is important is because I have seen, excuse me, on a few different occasions, working with coaches who may be caught up, in a tough situation, either with a parent who's complaining, who's written to the president or the chancellor or one of these people, that, if they know you, it sure does make it easier to diffuse that situation or easier to support you. But those relationships take time, they take outreach. And I feel like now in the spring is probably your best shot at doing it. You're not in the holidays yet, you're not in the summertime. Summertime can also be a good time, but sometimes people, aren't as present on campus. Maybe even volunteer for something that's going on your campus, that doesn't have to do with athletics. These are just ideas. And I think that investing in these relationships can really, be good to get to know people, good to be part of the community, but also have shown up later, to be helpful. All right, rolling right along. How are you? And more important, really, right, to this slide is how's your team? How are your players? I I think I had mentioned this in a convention talk in January, but this idea of checking in with your players, not in this end of the year, end of the season survey, and maybe not even just in your individual meetings, but putting out a short, quick, collectible, a lot of coaches do this on Google Forms, survey of just a handful of questions. And these are some ideas to throw your way. What are 1 or 2 words that describe the vibe of the team now? Second, is there anything that the coaches or leaders should be aware of? Third, what do you need? What do you need from us? Why is this helpful? For a few different reasons. I think that when you collect it in a survey, whether it's SurveyMonkey or Google Forms or some other, capacity that you can keep it, you're able to point to it. It's another form of documentation. And I think that, it also gives you a sense of where your team is at. 1 or 2 words that describe the vibe. You could get a real big insight into, are they tired? Are they struggling? Are they happy? Are they excited? Is there a lot of energy going on right now? And then, of course, if there's anything that you should be aware of, or, what do they need from you as coaches? I have found these collections to be a good tool in your coaching and in your managing of your team, but also in, to sometimes outweigh or give a different perspective to those end of the year surveys that sometimes can be really negative with a lot of complaints. And so if you're doing your own, that is one way to offset, we'll say, some of those end of the year surveys that can be filled with a lot of complaints. And certainly if you have collected these short surveys and have asked if there's anything that the coaches or leaders should be aware of, and nothing comes through, and then something happens at the end, you can point to your administrator and say, look, we've asked this, 4 or 5 different times over the course of the year or the course of the spring, and nothing has come up on the radar. I can't fix what I don't know, but it shows your effort to reach out to your team. So that's another point, to consider during this kind of off season. 4th quick hit, and I like the image of a thermostat because it's kind of setting a temperature, setting an expectation. I think that setting expectations is really the key, to being an effective leader or coach. What does this include or entail right now, where you are right now in the off season? Now is when many of you are working with your teams to get better, right? And you're kind of laying the groundwork for your fall season. What are keys and how you set these expectations? How clear you are, how specific you are. Are there skills that individual players need to be working on? Metrics, fitness metrics, strength and conditioning. Now is the time to be talking about those with care and with compassion, looking at this time for improvement as a time of mutual investment, where you do expect your individual athletes to be working hard to get better, and you are invested in coaching them and supporting them. How can we help you? There are resources, available, whether they're strength and conditioning or fitness or extra skill work with somebody on the coaching staff, or maybe even a sports psychologist in the department or a counseling center. So as the spring is going on, and you're kind of seeing the off-season development, this is also your springboard into your season, right? So at some point this spring, this off-season training is going to end. And if you're a coach who doesn't, have your team in the spring, at all, I would still expect, some permissible communication at the end before everybody goes away for the summer and before everybody's going to be coming back for preseason, which I imagine once you jump into preseason, it's like a little bit of stretch and then off, you're competing. This is the springboard, these conversations of setting expectations. And this is oftentimes, when some of you have to have that hard conversation, is it time to consider a change? Is this sport, is field hockey still something that, this athlete is passionate about? Are they eyes wide open in terms of the expectations of the role or the value that they bring to the team? And if it's time to consider a change, this would be a good time to have that conversation. Some of you, I talk through these conversations where you're setting expectations for the athlete at the end of the spring for her to be working on, so that when she comes back in preseason, there's an expectation of certain marks, metrics, skills, improvement, progress that you want to have been made, right? So if that's the case, we need to really make sure there's clarity now and specificity, so that when it comes time to evaluate that in preseason, right before you all are starting to compete, that it's not news. There are no surprises, right? You have had the conversation, hopefully more than one time, but certainly this bookend of the spring at this springboard from the end of the spring training into the summer is going to be an important marker for you as a coach to point to. Remember, we talked about this. Let's see where you're at. Great, you've made great progress. This is exciting. Or, that conversation in August saying, okay, we didn't see the progress, and so this is what that means. This means that it is unlikely for you to see a lot of playing time now. Or is this something we need to make sure that you are on board for the role that you have? It looks like you're going to have this fall, or is it time to consider that change? So I just feel like this is coming up on one of those, windows of communication, of setting expectations. What's really important for you as a coach is to model good communication skills in this relationship. You can have hard conversations in a compassionate way, right? And that's really, I think, the best way to have them. And then you can also set challenges to athletes, but in a way that inspires them, right? Doesn't make them seem like daunting and unattainable, but you can do this. How can we help you? There are resources available. So this is a little bit of a longer quick hit, but I think an important one, and certainly if you have questions about where you're at with any of your athletes, in these difficult conversations and want to talk, I would welcome that opportunity as well. All right, and I think the last of the quick hits, being someone who lives in North Carolina, in the middle of the triangle with Duke, UNC, and NC State, when I moved down, I had no idea the extent of March Madness and kind of what all that meant, what shade of blue, all of that. Now living there, for over 25 years, I'm in it. I get it. It is all consuming and so much fun and very passionate time in sports. And I hope that you have caught a little bit of the March Madness fever. The Cinderella stories, teams that get a bid from winning their conference tournament and then have a huge upset. We've had a lot of those, some of those heartbreaks because their seasons are ending. Your brackets, which I know, betting is still not permissible in the NCAA, but everybody across America is filling out brackets. And how's your bracket? Is it busted? Family brackets, all, company brackets. How are you doing? Just the fun and the competitiveness. It really showcases, I think, some of the best in sports, and unites kind of the country, even with your rivalries, in your allegiances. So I think both on the men's and women's side alike, but I want to highlight a few stories, a few key headliner women's sports stories, just to make sure that you're paying attention, and if not, look them up so that you can be inspired too. If you don't know Caitlin Clark, I want you to look her up. I'm worried about where you've been. She is right now considered the premier player in women's basketball, has smashed through the scoring record for all college basketball as the leader in points. And she has generated so much attention, selling out stadiums and whatnot. So great for women's sports. Really, really fun. A little edge. She definitely has an edge. She's not a favorite of everybody, but it is a story that as a coach of a women's sport, I want you to be paying attention to. Also, let's talk about some really incredible women's coaches. Dawn Staley on the top right, she's the head women's basketball coach at the University of South Carolina. She has created, a whole new dynasty at South Carolina. You can see that shirt that she's wearing. Everyone's watches women's sports. Another great story, you can look that up. That company sold out of those t-shirts and sweatshirts almost instantaneously when Dawn Staley wore it. And again, the message, we love it. Everyone's watching women's sports. And South Carolina is making a huge run in the tournament as the defending champs. And she is just such an incredible advocate and role model, as a strong female leader and coach, and somebody who has used social media and community outreach and networking and building relationships to build the following in the fan base in South Carolina. So she has a great story. Below in the bottom right corner, Kim Mulkey, the flashy fashionista coach at LSU, and has been, I think between the two of them, you're looking at the two highest paid women's coaches in all of college sports. It used to be Dawn Staley, and then Kim Mulkey went in and negotiated her contract after having a great season. She had a press conference recently that was very noteworthy, where she is kind of under threat or, of a real negative story by a reporter at the Washington Post. And she called it out. You should take a look at that press conference. She is feisty. She is strong. She takes risks that some of us would look at and think, oh my gosh, I could never say that or could never do that. But, I think that her story and her success and her passion is definitely something to pay attention to and watch. So lots of feel good, inspiring stories on the women's front in March Madness. And then just to kind of close out our time together today, I did find two fun clips. I think the first one is not actually from this year, but it is a March Madness clip showing, reminding us kind of one of the things that's really important to the athletes. I think you'll get a chuckle, but also you can see the heartache, when a season ends. So let's take a look at this.
What was your best memory from playing basketball at Boston College?
Probably just like
So there you have it. Food is important, but more than just the food, it's the camaraderie, it's the team time, that's what you miss, right? I mean, the games are important and the competitiveness is important, and certainly winning is exhilarating and losing is agonizing. But I thought that was kind of a lighthearted reminder about, what the athletes miss. And also on a serious note, food does matter. And I do field some complaints, or coaches that come to me have complaints about that they're not, eating enough or not being fed enough. And some of us think like, how is that even possible? How could they even complain about it? But I think what we want to pay attention to as you're planning your travel and whatnot for the fall is letting them have a say in meals on the road. I know there's nobody in the country that really is not on a tight budget, right? Maybe not the basketball heights, that are in March Madness now, but for most coaches, it is a consideration. Don't scrimp on the food and let the athletes have a say in what's going on. But I did think that was kind of a funny, lighthearted one. This last one is recent. It's a player that I think you may have seen if you've been paying attention to, who is a three-point shooter who took down Kentucky. He was, I want to make sure I get it, Oakland. They were the ones that upset Kentucky. He had 10 3-pointers, and he reminds us what he's going to miss.
We really wanted to win today. I wanted to go to Dallas really bad. All the guys wanted to go to Dallas really bad, but I told them in the locker room, the thing I wanted the most really was to see everyone at practice on Monday. That's the thing I'm going to miss the most, is just seeing my guys every single day.
We're talking about practice, Ted Lasso, and I wanted to pull that clip as well. How important practice is, how mundane practice can start to feel, maybe now in the off season too, when you're not getting to compete or prepare for games. But practice matters, and what kind of energy are you bringing to practice every day? Because at some point, this year's team is not going to get to practice anymore. And so the value of practice, and kind of making sure that you as a coach are keeping that special, keeping it elevated, the standard, the expectations, the energy, that people are not just kind of floating through a practice or thinking that it doesn't matter. That was a good reminder from Jack Golke. That's the megastar 3-point shooter who also had a great quote about confidence and about how he walks out and he knows that he's, they don't have draft picks on their team, but he walks out onto the court and thinks that he's the best player out there. So a lot of fun stories in March Madness. I hope you catch a little bit of the fever and take a look at what's going on the men's and women's side as we enter kind of the Sweet 16 and teams are moving forward. It's very exciting. Other than that, here's my contact information. Technically my office hours are done, but I really do want to be available, and especially for coaches who are facing some tough times, or however I can help you. Don't be shy, reach out and we'll find a time to talk. Becca, I'm looking to see if we have any questions or anything in the chat or
We do. We actually have several good questions for you.
great.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. How do you best advocate for more resources for your program? Like I think they're asking, what's the actual process? What should that look like in terms of what you bring? Who do you meet with? What are you asking for?
Right. I think it's really important to go into those meetings, whether they're salary negotiations or your budget, informed with a good sense of what you have, things that you need, how much things cost, if you can, how much your budget is compared to people that you're competing against. If you have colleagues that are willing to share that, how your budget compares to people in your own department, if colleagues are willing to share that. Those are conversations that can sometimes feel a little funny or awkward, but I would just, I would advise starting those saying, look, I'd like to ask you some questions about your budget. If you don't feel comfortable talking about it, I totally understand. If you do, I'm just trying to kind of get my budget organized and have a sense of, how do we make travel work here? Or what are some creative ways, that you can make the dollar stretch? And then sit down. The first person that I would speak with is your sport administrator. Sometimes they call him a sport supervisor, and go through areas. I think it's important to always note areas that are good, right? See the good. Where do you feel like there's sufficient funds? Where do you feel like you're well supported? And then what your needs are. And then how are we really conscious about the pronouns that we use? How can we get to a point where this number is higher, what needs to happen, or sometimes it just needs to be like, look, we can't travel on this amount of money, so we have to play these conference games. Let's figure out what the solution is. It is tough. Money conversations are never easy, rarely easy or comfortable. But I think when you're informed, I also think timing is really important. It's not something that you bring up kind of on the fly. You want to make sure that you let your sport administrator know, look, I want to go over the budget numbers before I need to submit them. When's a good time that you kind of clear the decks and have their focus? If you're at a school that's a big basketball school, it's going to be tough right now if they're still playing, right? Because, or, conversely in the fall, if you're at a football school, you just have to find the timing where it's doesn't feel like the person you're speaking to is distracted. I do get worried with my coaches whose operating budgets depend so much, and by so much, I mean like 50% or more on fundraising or donations. I know that exists. That is hard because it is just such a variable. And sometimes I feel like when you are raising money, then sometimes I've seen schools kind of lower their contribution because they feel like you're able to bring in more. And so I would be very mindful if you are sitting on kind of big accounts of your camps or clinics or fundraising dollars right now, because that can signal to your administration, oh, look, they don't need as much support because look at these funds that they have. That does not mean I want you to spend wildly. I just have seen, and it makes me sad and frustrated, coaches who are very fiscally responsible, and it's like the ant and the grasshopper, and they've been like storing up for the winter and storing up and storing up. And then all of a sudden that's either taken or it's saying, hey, you use those funds. So if you're raising funds, I wouldn't be shy about putting them towards things that you think that your program needs. in whatever capacity you need to do with permissions and all of that. But these are really important questions right now. Money and how money flows through athletic departments feels like a hot topic right now. So I do think those conversations need to happen in a good time, where you have their attention, that you're informed, that you have your asks, that you have, ready to go, that you have comparables as to what you need. And certainly if you're worried about going over budget, that you say so early and not after. I think that's really important so that you don't get dinged. Whereas if you don't have a budget that's going to really support the needs of your program, you need to let your administrator know. You really do.
Good. With the how are you doing survey for our student athletes, do you recommend it being anonymous, or do you have the athletes put their name on it?
Such a good question. And I go back and forth on this. So my answer is this. My preference would be that names are on it. And that is because I think that follow-up is important and helpful. And if it's anonymous, it's harder. It's just frankly harder to follow up. However, if you are walking into a program, or your program is at a time now where it feels like trust might be kind of at a low and you have to rebuild it, that might be a time to say, you know what, I don't need your names. I just want your feedback, and kind of start there and develop that trust and kind of build it in different ways so that your players feel like it's no big deal to put their name on a survey like that. So I do think it depends. My preference is that the names go on, but that you explain why. I want to know, I want your honest feedback, but I want to be able to have a conversation with you. Why do people not want to put their names on it? Because they're worried that what they say is not going to be well received, and they don't want it affiliated with them. If that's the case, I think as a coach, you still want that information, right? If the vibe on your team is really negative, you need to know that, and you don't want just, though it's fine, and then it's masking the problem. So I don't want the name to be a limiting factor in the collection of the information. So I would leave it up to your discretion as to where you are with your team. Maybe talk to your leaders about it. Say, hey, I'd love your names on them. What do you think about that? Is that going to deter people? And if the answer is, you know what, coach, they might not, then say, okay, don't need your names. Just really want to know how you're feeling.
Great. What are some best practices for effectively managing student survey feedback that is either surprising with false or negative allegations? And what's the best way to navigate and move the team forward successfully after a difficult survey feedback?
Yes. These are really tough moments for coaches. I've walked many coaches through that moment where they get the survey feedback and it's just soul crushing. I mean, and if it's a surprise, that is tough, because if you've been going along thinking that everything is fine and then all of a sudden this is all coming out, that is one of the first things I would say to your sport administrator, say, look, never heard this before. This is surprising. It's upsetting. I recognize it. Some of it, I wonder, is there a misunderstanding here? Because this has not at all been my experience or perspective. The line that you need to walk on that is not feeling so disconnected from your team that they're thinking like, how could everybody say this and you have no idea? But also make it clear, like, nobody did come and tell you that this happened. However, you want to know, you want to be able to address it, you want to be able to make it better. If there are these concerns, things that are just absolutely categorically false, I think are important to say to your administration. If it's a specific allegation, you need to know, like, I never hit a player, like not once, not once. I'm not sure where this is coming from, but clearly somebody's upset. So we really should work to get to the bottom of it. I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to be defensive or angry. I think those reactions do not go well with administrators, because from where the administrator sits, there's a problem. So as a coach, you're either going to be part of the problem or part of the solution, right? And so you need to align yourself on the solution side, which is to understand it, clarify it, remove things that really don't belong or are not true, and then deal with what's the source of the disgruntlement. What I hope is that if we use these quick hit surveys, you're going to be able to show your administrator, look, I've asked 5 times, is there anything I should be aware of? And nobody said anything. And again, this is a point where maybe being an anonymous would help, and say they didn't even have to put their names on it and nobody said anything. So I'm surprised. I'm not sure where this is coming from, because we have checked in a bunch. And so that helps. That kind of like diffuses, any panic about it. And then just keep working through it. Those are tough situations, but that's at least where I would start.
Great. This is connected, this question is a little bit connected to it, but when you hear, question is, when you hear to document everything, what does that mean? Like, what does it look like as a head coach to be documenting everything?
Okay. So that's daunting, right? To like document everything. You absolutely cannot write everything down that you say or do constantly. I don't want you to record yourself all the time, because that's, that creates this, state of paranoia. What that means is when you have, how I interpret it and advise, is when you have, substantive moments or conversations with either your team as a whole or with individual players, that you take some notes on it, right? So I have coaches who have a file for each player, and when that player comes in and meets, they will jot down notes. Some of them still do it by hand, and they have paper files. Some do it with a Google Doc. Some do it with by email and say, "Dear Becca, thanks so much for coming in. Glad we were able to talk about, your playing time. I understand and heard that you're frustrated. These are the things, just as a reminder, that I really want you to focus on, your footwork, your stick work, whatever. If at any time you want to talk again, let me know. And if you have any questions, right, send." What's great about that, specific time stamp, date stamped, and then you're able to file it. I could file it in Becca's file as a sent message. And so another way to document are by text. I've talked about that before. Texts are easy and quick. Don't delete those chains. They can be really helpful in showing your communication with the player. You also need to be aware sometimes, you need to really make sure that that communication is appropriate, that it's not a deluge of text messages to a player. I've seen that be a criticism of coaches. They'll send 20 messages. It's really actually easy to send 20 messages. It might sound like a big number, but next time, you're in a conversation, count how many messages go back and forth. But that is a source of documenting. It can be a source of positive documenting. Becca, you were awesome at practice day. Good job. Boom. Again, time, date stamped, shows support, compassion, recognition of positive, something positive, in the player's world. Becca, saw that you looked a little down. Everything okay? Question mark. Again, care, concern. So those are ways to document it. Certainly, medical stuff should be documented by your trainer. What you want to make sure is that if somebody is not cleared for practice, that you have it noted either on your practice plan or from a trainer's report that they didn't practice, right? So sometimes that has come up, or what their limitations might be in a practice. Again, that should fall mostly on your athletic training staff, but how they are incorporated or not into your practice might be something you could include. But it really is kind of the big stuff. Excuse me, those big moments, if you have a big meeting that's, some kind of conflict that you're working through, that you just take a few notes about what happened, what was said, and that you save that. It does not always have to be sent by email. That is just one way I've seen in those individual meetings, coaches manage that documenting. But if you have any other specific questions, or if anybody else has any ideas about how they document, I'm always open to hearing kind of what works. Basically want a system that's not going to overtake you and be like another huge task for you, but that you can kind of integrate well into, your workflow. And that's why some have found it really easy to use something on a phone that they can just put in a few notes, or even record a message and it transcribes it into a note. So I hope that's helpful with a few ideas.
Yeah. That's good. I have two more questions. One is another one based on the survey. So what is best practices for handling survey feedback? It seems like there's no standard for how coaches should deal with it. I know coaches that refuse to read it and do not speak about it and hold that boundary. I sat down and read every point this year. What is the best balance?
I wish I had a great answer for the survey question. This is what I think. I think surveys, if they are well written and well administered, can be helpful tools for feedback. I think the problem that we have now in a lot of places is that they are used as weapons, right? And they are given at times when student athletes are tired, cranky, sad that they lost, angry, frustrated, right after the season, sometimes right before exams. And so you're collecting, this information at not a great time. And then it's, what did you not like about your coach, right? Questions that are just inherently bring negative feedback, like a negative answer. And so if that's the question and the time that it's given, and then you sit down and read 24 of those, I mean, that's going to be a terrible day. Like, you're not going to like that. And it's probably not going to be super helpful. So how do you get in front of it? I think you need to talk to your sport administrator about, excuse me, what questions are going to be asked and when it's going to be given. And then that gives you a better shot of having feedback that I would recommend you sitting down and reading, even if it's a little bit hard, because you want to know ways to get better, right? And that's one outlet or one avenue. But if it's really destructive, I might ask, I have some coaches who just have their administrator read them, and then, they sit down and have a conversation, so that if you feel like it's just going to totally destroy you and your sense of, self-worth, then no, I don't want you to sit down and read them. I don't, because that's not going to help you. And it could make you, angry or jaded or not want to coach anymore. But I really would like us to get ahead of the survey question and problem and get those questions off surveys that are like, how much does your coach know about field hockey? It's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're 18 and I brought you here to teach you about field hockey, and now you're going to tell me how much I know. I mean, not helpful. Those are not helpful questions. But we have administrators who are literally opening SurveyMonkey and making it up themselves. There are people who do surveys professionally. Like, it is actually a science. And the best group that I know of, if you are in like a place where surveys are just your nemesis and really are terrible feedback and terrible questions, Matthew Davidson, Excellence with Integrity, we can get that information out to you. Excellence with Integrity, they're out of California. Their company motto is surveys are tools, not weapons. I was like, bing, like that's exactly what we want. So if you have a survey that's a tool, I would love for you to read it. If you have a survey that's devastating, survey results that are devastating, I think you need to have a sense that there's a lot of negativity so that you can get a game plan together. But if you're going to be crushed by reading it, that's not what I want for you.
Okay, one more, Sam, and then we'll wrap it up. What do you recommend bringing to a senior leadership meeting, like say with a chancellor, VP, or president? Like, is there a takeaway or a best idea of a one-pager to bring to a senior leadership meeting?
Absolutely. I think that if you've never met them before, I think it's an opportunity to introduce yourself and your program to this leader and say, I'm here because I really believe in the mission of the school or the values. I wanted to meet you in person so you could, and invite you to any games or practices coming up this fall. Here's a little bit about our program, just so you have some familiarity with it. And in that, that snapshot, which we've talked before about season snapshots, I would highlight kind of what are the best achievements. You could probably use a lot of your recruiting pitches and materials in that, but celebrate your team. This is how this team, represents our school. And I would love for you, to meet the athletes at any time. You can just come and walk through. We'd love that. Or a specific invitation to team meal or a certain game, or to come and talk to the team. But as I've seen those relationships develop just like that from a meeting like that, sometimes you go to a talk that the president's giving and you just go up afterwards and introduce yourself. And that's just the first one. And then maybe a little bit later, you have a follow-up and they remember you from being at that session. Or you volunteer for something that they're there, some kind of, student event. And then you just get to kind of rub elbows or have informal conversations with some of those leaders. And then you follow up, with a one-on-one and then an invitation. It's been really fun to see coaches develop relationships that those administrators or university leaders then come to their games, right? And they're on the sideline for a little bit and they see your team in action. They see you coaching in action. Those I think can be really healthy, really constructive. And again, be helpful, in so many different ways. you know, in terms of your athletes getting to know and bridging that gap, sometimes bridging that gap between academics and athletics. And then again, right now, when we see parents writing to them, if they know you and they have interactions with you, that parent letter or complaint is just going to read differently, you know, because of your interaction. But I want you to be invested in the places that you work. And I think that almost all the coaches I work with believe in relationships. They're important to you, and they go in a lot of different directions. And this is just a different direction, but it can be really helpful and important because you really are on the same team, and that president is your captain, right? So that's kind of how I view, you know, those relationships.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Oh, wait, a question popped up.
Okay.
Oh, Kate's thanking you. It's Kate thanking you. So thank you, Sam, for everything. Really appreciate it. You obviously see Sam's contact information right there on the screen if you want to grab it and jot it down. You never know when you're going to need it. Sam, thanks so much for everything. And thanks to everyone for joining us. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you so much. Everybody take care.
Bye, Sam.